Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Gimba Umar. The media, whether traditional or new, is believed to be the ear and eyes of any society. But there are growing concerns around the world and in some parts of Africa where journalists die or are jailed in the course of making daily news available to the public. This is why May the 3rd of every year is observed as World Press Freedom Day, to highlight the importance of free press as a tool for development, democracy and good governance. Meanwhile, this year's World Press Freedom Day coincides with the day 3 Al Jazeera journalists in Egypt will appear in court for allegedly aiding members of a terrorist organization, with the government saying that they operated without proper accreditation. So we ask, what are your thoughts on the level of press freedom in Africa? Join the conversation on Twitter at TVC Africa Today or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. We'll take this report and Africa Today will be back. Stay with us.
In Nairobi, over 2 dozen journalists drawn mainly from the Foreign Correspondent Association of East Africa congregated outside Chester House before marching through the streets of Kenya's capital while holding placards that called for the freedom of the press. The association's board member, Gabe Joslo, called on the Egyptian authorities to hasten the release of Peter Greste, Mohamed Fahmy, Baha Mohamed, and Abdallah El-Shami.
And we're out here today just to continue to put pressure on all the authorities, all the avenues of influence, to try to get Peter and his detained colleagues from Al Jazeera, including Baher Mohamed and Mohamed Fahmy, who have been detained since the end of December, to have them released. We feel that what has happened to them is a complete injustice. Jail.
Despite his continued incarceration in the Egyptian jail since last December, the association had a surprise for the detained colleague, as he was given a special responsibility by the board.
That we have decided to elect Peter Greste as our chairman in absentia in a show of solidarity for him and our other detained colleagues in Egypt.
The campaign has already had an outpouring of popular and political support worldwide, and a call was made to respect press freedom in the globe.
So yeah, we have people who have come out who know Peter, who care about Peter, but also they care about the issue, which is freedom of the press, and how more and more journalists these days are being imprisoned, are being killed, and yeah, we're just out here to show our support.
This is the second time in less than a month that journalists in Kenya have held a protest demanding the release of the Al Jazeera staff. The association led its members in picketing outside the Egyptian embassy in Nairobi, where activity was paralyzed for the better part of the day. Ken Karuri, TVC News, Nairobi.
Now, Ethiopia recently charged 6 bloggers and 3 journalists to court for attempting to incite violence. The country passed an anti-terrorism law in 2009, which stipulates that anyone caught publishing information that could incite readers to commit acts of terrorism could be jailed for 10 to 20 years. Joining us to look at the press freedom in Africa is Libros Oshoma. He's a lawyer and human rights activist. And as we proceed, we will link up with via phone with Salim Amin, chairman of Africa 24 Media. He's based in Nairobi, Kenya. Thanks for joining us, Oshoma.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Let's start like this. What are your thoughts about the press generally in Africa?
Press freedom in Africa is still not a very welcome development with government and governance in Africa, because largely, if you realize, you know, when after a lot of countries in Africa gained independence, you know, over time, most of these countries were ruled by military, and then, but now gradually you see democracy sweeping across Africa, and so it's like you still have a lot of them, Uganda, Rwanda, and some of these countries, you still have a carryover of that dictatorial mentality. Still a hangover of that, and so you still find this press freedom not something that is really entrenched in this system, even though there's been international clamor for it. And then also some of them also have been able to embrace press freedom, although with, you know, a lot of limitations, because largely Africa is underreported by the Western press. And then, there's now the belief that if we truly had to compete, Africa must report Africa.
Do you believe that there can be total freedom for the press in Africa?
There's nothing like absolute freedom, if that's what you're talking about. There must be limitations. There are, even everywhere in the world, there is nothing like total, absolute freedom of the press. There are limitations, but that limitation should not be according to the dictate of the leaders in government. They should be well spelled out, and so that everybody, participant and stakeholders, should know beforehand that, okay, these are the limitations and this how far I can't go, and these areas that are no-go areas. And the no-go areas we're talking about, like I said, shouldn't be areas where, for example, the government says, look, making inciting statement that will encourage terrorism. And then you now discover that a situation where information leaking, certain government officials to some terrorism, and then are released through the press, and then because these government officials have relationship with the government of the day, it is easy to hound these pressmen and say, look, these people are inciting, the populace against the government. So that shouldn't be. It should be situations where, you look at if you must report, if there is freedom, it shouldn't be a yardstick or a license to go, libeling the government or publishing false and malicious information, or you intentionally spread malicious falsehood.
Do you think that this is the case for the African journalists?
No, that's not the case. Like I said, the case for the African journalism is quite unfortunate because largely you find out that Africa before now, apart from a few countries like Tanzania, Ghana, Nigeria, before military intervention, these are countries that gradually embraced the culture of Western press, and then with the military intervention in their polities, you now discover that it was difficult. This governance was more or less run like a nocturnal thing. Everything about government was in secret. And so it's difficult now because when you talk about press freedom, it cannot be reporting the people. It must be reporting the people vis-a-vis the activities of government and governance on how, its impact on the people. And so that had been the problem of African journalists, and so you now have this carryover of that kind of mentality, and you hold so much to information, and you don't want to let go, and then it's always the excuse of, oh, we don't want this information to be misused. That's why you find out in some countries everything about government is tagged secret. Even though, like, okay, take Nigeria, for example.
Let me put you on pause here before we return to you. Joining us via phone is Salim Amin. He's the chairman of Africa 24 Media in Kenya. I want to thank you so much indeed for joining us, Mr. Salim. Now, looking at the level of press freedom in Africa, how conducive is the continent for the practice of journalism in a whole?
Well, I think we can't take Africa as one entity. Different countries have different levels of freedom on the media and different levels of restraints. And so there are some countries where it is much more difficult, areas that have got conflict at the moment, places like Somalia, where there's been a number of journalists that have been killed in recent months and years and weeks even. Kenya is becoming a little bit more difficult now to practice as a journalist because of security laws that seem to supersede freedom laws. In Nigeria, in certain areas of Nigeria, there is it's very difficult for journalists to get access and therefore to report because it's very dangerous in those places. Even in South Africa, there are problems. So I think every country has a variety of different problems, but they can't all be lumped together.
Okay, Salim, also, if I may ask you this question, African leaders continue to insist on positive government news from the media. How much of a threat is this press freedom in Africa? How much of a threat is it?
I think, it should have been a lot easier in recent years. We should have, with new media, with technology, these have made journalism easier on the continent. But actually, it seems to be getting harder in many countries. And, governments seem to be more scared of the media. And the public is also demanding more information, more accountability, more transparency. And the people that are bringing that accountability and transparency are usually journalists. And unfortunately, they're now being targeted because many governments don't want to see that accountability and that transparency. It's holding them to the fire, and they don't like it. So it's becoming much harder to practice journalism around the continent.
You as a case study, if I may just chip in there, have been in this line of business for quite some time now, Salim. How difficult is it for you as an entrepreneur and also as a journalist practicing in Africa?
Well, I mean, we are in a slightly different family. We don't cover news, hard news, so much. We also are in a Pan-African space, so we're not seen really as any particular threat to a particular country. We look for stories that are of a Pan-African nature, and we also try and look for stories that will encourage, inspire, and motivate. Stories of success and opportunity, and Africans doing amazing things around the continent. So we're not really looking for the controversial or for the negative. There are many other journalists that are doing it, many brave journalists, far braver than myself, and are doing that kind of work, and we obviously support them as much as we can. But we're not really in that space, and we try and tell positive stories that will make a change to the continent and the way people look at the continent, as well as how, if we can highlight successes in certain countries, then we hope that those will be duplicated in countries around the continent and we can learn from each other.
Salim, thank you very much indeed, but I'll have to indulge you to just stay on the line for a little bit longer as we continue on the program Africa Today, because we're taking a short break and the program continues in just a moment. Stay with us. And if you're just joining us, this is Africa Today, and we're looking at press freedom in Africa with Libros Oshoma, a lawyer and human rights advocate. We still have Salim Amin of Africa 24 Media in Kenya with us online. Let's now focus on the arrested Al Jazeera journalist. What are your thoughts? Does this sound to you as the way forward, even for journalists as in general in Africa, and then in particular for the Egyptian government? What does this spells to you?
Like Salim said, in areas where you have conflict, and unfortunately you have so much conflict in a lot of areas in Africa now, and so it's always very easy for the government to want to suppress information. It's very easy also for them not to want to report the true state of things, and so that's why that's what's actually it's happening in with the Al Jazeera journalist in Egypt. And then also it is always easy also to say to win the confidence of the support of the people, to tag these people as supporting terrorism, and it's like giving a dog a bad name in order to hang it. And this shouldn't be the way forward for journalism or the practice of journalism in Africa, even though you hear that the press freedom law it's been passed in most part of the continent, but yet, at some point, if you read some of these laws, you discover that there are also limitations to even the practice of press freedom in Africa, and so that's the major problem, and that's why, in spite of the demands for transparency and the release of these journalists, rather than use that the day to celebrate press freedom. You truly see what is happening, adjourning the matter to the 3rd of May. It's symbolic, and it's a way, it's like sending a signal, you know, to you know, journalists in the continent, in the country, to, even though you want to try as much as you can to report the true position, but that government is not truly, you know, interested in the true position, except, you know, from the way they see it.
Let's take the side of Salim, who is still on the line. Salim of Africa 24, still on the line in Kenya. Salim, we're still focusing on the Al Jazeera journalist story in Egypt. What do you make of the situation at the moment?
Oh, I think the situation in Egypt is very unfortunate, and it's very sad. There is no basis for the allegations against the journalists that have been imprisoned. Peter Grester is a very good friend of mine. I know him well. He's an amazing journalist and has been in this business for many, many years. And there is absolutely no grounds on the accusations that on the things that they've been accused of spying or for operating illegally. These are just completely unfounded accusations that I hope the justice will be served and they will be set free. They've been in prison for far too long, and I can't emphasize more strongly that they must be freed, immediately, because the Egyptian government is really holding a lot of journalists under no. They haven't even gone to trial. They haven't had anything proved against them, and it's really unacceptable. And the international community needs to do more to put pressure on the Egyptian government to free these journalists, all the journalists.
Now, Salim, the case of Mohamed Fahmy and Peter Gresti is one of many other cases that have been reported or not reported by the media. And with the level of government resistance and clampdown, will the media survive the many batterings from governments and interest from private sector, call it if you will?
Well, I absolutely think, the media is very, very resilient. I don't think there's any question that the media will survive. What we have to do is we have to band together. We have to be able to work together to support each other. The amount of support, for example, that the journalists from Al Jazeera have received from their colleagues around the world on Twitter and on social media, and it must be it's hugely encouraging for the future of journalism. We all are very competitive with each other when we're in the field. We all try and scoop each other. We all try and get one over each other in terms of a story. But I think when push comes to shove, we actually do stand together very well. And we need to do that much, much more in order to continue this very proud profession and to be the watchman and women of society. We really need to work much harder now and utilize the people who are on our side using social media and using all this new technology. We need to utilize and bring in people by telling good, accurate, honest stories that are not biased, that are very objective, in order to tell the truth about certain situations. We can make a huge difference, and I think we are doing it, and that's why governments are very afraid of us.
Thank you, Salim Amin, for your contributions and your thoughts, and of course your time on the show. Now, coming back to you, the clamor for the freedom of information. The Nigerian government at some point was able to pass the Freedom of Information Bill. We've had a similar situation in South Africa also, and also in Tunisia recently. How much of a hold can the government have? What limitations does the government have on the media?
You find out, before I answer your question directly, you find out that if in South Africa, in the apartheid South Africa, just what's happening in Egypt now happened then. It was easy for government to clamp down on journalists and say these are journalists that are supporting the banned ANC movement and all of that. And so that's what you see play out now. And then the freedom of information, even in Nigeria where it is passed, you discover that even getting information, access to information, it's very difficult in spite of the clamor for the law and in spite of how simple it is on paper. And also, if you look at in the other places in Africa where it has been passed also, you'll find that where there are conflicts, it is always very difficult for journalists, like Salim said, to have access to this information. And yet the people demand more. And so if, apart from the journalists bonding together, the people that demand transparency and accountability also need to bond with the information giver and to demand also that there must be transparency, there must be freedom, you know, apart from freedom of the press, freedom to disinformation. Until we do that, there's little or much that we can do in Africa as against what's obtainable in the rest part of the world. And because it's easy for us to pass the freedom of information, you know, in some of these countries, but how well this information is assessed and how well it is, you know, obtainable, because you have a law. It's one thing to have a law. It's another thing for the law to be truly operational, and then for the government to truly say, okay, yes, we want to truly give access to all the books. Until you have, you know, a collaboration of both, it will just be a law on paper, and then practice of it will be a different thing altogether.
The school of thought is of the opinion that the government will never accede to your supposition.
Yes, because if we don't see, if the people, apart from the journalists now, if the people that demand for this information don't see themselves as, you know, being powerful than the government, then it will be difficult because the government will just sit down there and give you what they want you to hear. But if you truly believe that the power belongs to the people and that the government is there for the people, and so at every point, the people should be carried along. The people should know to, apart from a few, you know, information that you feel might be detrimental. The people have a right to know, you know, the daily activities of government and governance and how it is carried on and how it would reflect on the people. Until we know that it's a right, then it will be easy for you to say that government will not accede to some of these requests. It will also be very easy for you to say it's a press thing. I'm not a pressman. And so, but now almost everybody is a pressman. With the new media, you can sit down in the comfort of your home and report, you know, what is happening here to the whole world. And so we are all, you know, pocket journalists in our own way, whether we like it or not now. And so,
do you believe that the African people think the media has failed or the press has failed them in reporting actuality about the government?
Yeah, before now. That's why you find out that there's a huge embrace, you know, of the new media. People wanting to say it the way they feel it, say it the way they see it. Because unlike the Africa before now, you know, it was easy for the media to report. It was easy for the people to rely on the media for information. People still rely on the media for information now, but on the conventional media. But now you have the new media. It's easy now for you to say, well, I don't. Gradually also, like the print media in some countries, whether you like it or not, gradually it will phase out because people will rather want to, you know, go online and source for this information. With a click of the button now, you can read what is happening in the entire world. Unlike before, you need to wait for the electronic media, you know, to give you this information. The print media gives you this information. But now it's not that not as difficult as it used to be, and so that's where also the media now there is a whole a new dawn. What I would say, new dawn, and so they are moving with the trend of time, and because the information age now, it's not, you know, it's no more analog. You know, it's more of a digital age now. You need to move with it, and it can only take, you know, a short while for government to continually suppress information, whether you like it or not. Unlike okay, like in the areas where in the regions where there are crises in Africa, it's always, you find out that the eyewitness account is always different from the government account. Government might tell you that there was a bomb blast in an area, and then you say 2 people lost their lives and so many injured. But eyewitness account will tell you 20 people died and 5 people injured. You know, and then you see photographs, sometimes you see live videos online and the rest. And so when people cannot rely on your information, it's either you ship up or you ship out.
Do you believe that the government, or shall I say, on the other hand, the media owners are influenced a great deal to be partisan?
Yes, because in Africa, media, apart from media practitioners, you have media owners. And a lot of these media owners are politicians who would, for the sole purpose of political gain, you know, will want to own media companies. And apart from a few smaller ones owned by media practitioners, actually. And so when it comes to politics, you would always see, in some cases, the influence of, you know, even in America, you see there are some media houses that will never see anything good in a Democrat candidate. Or there's some media houses also that will never see anything good in Republican
Libras
candidate.
Oshoma, I want to thank you so much indeed for your time on the show. Many thanks indeed. Libras Oshoma, a lawyer and a human rights activist. Now, global statistics shows that about 456 journalists have been forced into exile since 2008, just as 211 journalists were held in prison, while 70 were killed last year. 14 more have suffered the same fate this year, which means more than 1,000 journalists have been killed since 1992, amounting to 1 journalist nearly every week. Behind those numbers are journalists simply going about their lawful business of gathering news, thus raising the need for a fresh press, a free press, and a safe environment for journalists on the African continent. And that's our show for today. You can watch episodes of the show on youtube.com/TVC Africa Today. Till we come your way again, I'm Gimba Umar, and remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.